neighborhoods. And at the Sun-Times and our partner radio station WBEZ, we are devoted and dedicated to covering this evolving story.
Yes.
If there was a rebellion out there, believe me, we would have reported it.
Yes.
We are the local paper, and we're on top of things.
Yeah, and Lynn, these stories which matter so much on the ground in your patch with national implications, it's repeated in other parts of the United States. We're talking here about nothing less than the definition and redefinition of America. That's not overstating it.
Well, it is certainly at least a drastic change in the direction of the country. So just recently, I did a vertical video. You could find it on the Sun-Times YouTube channel or on TikTok, just ticking through the number of federal programs that President Trump has either ordered slashed or cut just in Chicago and the state of Illinois. Billions of dollars of funding.
Yes.
So again, when I say that Chicago mirrors the nation, we have the struggle between what is the presidential power,
yes,
what is just the regular First Amendment rights of protesters, plus everything else that Trump is trying to do to impact cities in blue states and blue cities.
Right. Good to talk to you, Lynn. Thank you so much. To call it interesting is to undersell it. This is truly important stuff. Lynn Sweet there from the Chicago Sun-Times. And Pienaar Friends coming up.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
It is 6 o'clock. I'm John Pienaar, here with Pienaar and Friends. Tonight, that is Joe Tanner, the political strategist, and the former Labour advisor, Matthew Torbitt. And you, very, very happy to have you here. Tell me what you're thinking. Send me a text, send me a tweet. We're live streaming on YouTube if you want to see us as well as listen. And either way, stay with us, join in the conversation, and we can chat after the news with Andy Hayes.
Thank you, John. Good evening. The Culture Secretary has told MPs that resources should not determine whether Maccabi Tel Aviv fans are able to travel to Villa Park in Birmingham next month. But Lisa Nandy says the responsibility lies with local agencies and it's not for governments to assess the risks. It's been decided that safety concerns mean the supporters should not attend a Europa League match. However, Ms Nandy says no one should be excluded from taking part in public events because of who they are.
People are free in this country to protest peacefully. They are free to lobby government and event organisers about which countries can participate in tournaments, and they are free to choose not to attend events or purchase products that they find unacceptable. But they are not entitled to dictate who can participate in competitions, attend a football match, or walk the streets for fear of threats or reprisals.
The Metropolitan Police says it will stop investigating non-crime hate incidents. It's also dropped its investigation into gender-critical campaigner Graham Linehan. The co-creator of Father Ted was arrested at Heathrow by armed officers in September over some posts on X. A married father of two has become the first person in the UK to be jailed for encouraging a child to self-harm under the Online Safety Act. Carl Davis, who's 42 and from the Wirral, has been given a 20-year sentence. He groomed the victim online when she was 13 before picking her up from school and abusing her. Zoe Becker from the Crown Prosecution Service says it was a difficult case to work on.
None of the cases that we deal with are easy, but when you have these cases where there are extensive chat histories and photographs being shared back and forth of not only kind of sexual images, but also in images of self-harm, it does take its toll.
Blind people have been able to read again after having a tiny microchip inserted in the back of their eyeball. Patients who were previously living in darkness took part in a trial with a team at Moorfields Eye Hospital in London. They can now recognise faces, do crosswords and read books. Eleanor Hayward is the Times' health editor.
The operation itself is actually pretty straightforward. It takes about 2 hours and they just insert this microchip into the back of the retina. But then after that, it takes quite a few months for the brain to kind of connect the images that are coming in via the glasses to the microchip.
The royal family reportedly believes the allegations against Prince Andrew should be examined in the fullest way. A Buckingham Palace source has told Sky News that new claims that emerged over the weekend are of grave concern. Andrew reportedly asked a police protection officer to dig up dirt on Virginia Giuffre, who said she had sex with him 3 times, something he's always denied. And Pizza Hut is to close 68 restaurants and 11 delivery sites after the company behind its UK venues fell into administration. More than 1,200 workers are being made redundant. But the company that runs the global Pizza Hut business, Yum Brands, says it's bought the UK restaurants in a rescue deal that will save 64 of the sites. And a roundup of the news on demand is available on the Times News Briefing, and that's any podcast platform available.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker, this is Times Radio.
It is really good to have you with us here on Pienaar and Friends, an hour of good conversation in very good company, which tonight is Joe Tanner, the political strategist, and the Labour former advisor Matthew Torbitt. As I say, we are streaming on YouTube. You can see us as well as listen, but either way, do stay with us and do join in. Tell me what you're thinking. Send me a text or a tweet. Matthew, what's your thought for the day?
My thought of the day is, when is a spy not a spy, John? I always get a level of interest in these sorts of stories and a bit of PTSD, because I was working for Barry Gardiner when he had his scandal, or supposed scandal, a few years back. And I came out of that going, this is a bit of a stitch-up, actually, from what the information we were given from the security services and what subsequently didn't come out of it. The fact that Christine Lee was never arrested, never charged, never questioned, never anything to this day. And I nearly laughed reading the story in the Sunday Times yesterday. Now, we've heard a lot of different things come out about this case, and it will no doubt continue to run and run. I could not believe that one of the gentlemen that are alleged to be a spy was caught at the airport a few weeks before with cash in a suitcase. Yes. Now, just think about that for a minute. He's got cash in a suitcase, having come back from China, potentially having met Xi's sort of chief of staff, as he's known. That's like something from a cartoon, John. Like that, there's nothing almost more open and short if you were to put that in front of a jury and go, well, that doesn't sound very good, does it? And I'm astounded at how this, first of all, has been handled, which in a way maybe is a little bit typical of the way Labour has been, and quite reactive in government and not really smelling the politics of certain issues, but also how I was trying to make my mind up whether it's cock-up or conspiracy, and I think it's a bit of both. I think with the political language that's basically been lifted from Labour's manifesto by the Deputy National Security Advisor into his words, as well as the fact that I think the DPP has a lot of questions to answer in the fact that we were 5% off the threshold. I'm not being funny. You look at all the information here; it doesn't pass the smell test at all. So I'm not sure what else you've got to do to potentially be seen as a spy. But then I suppose it feeds into the wider culture. I was doing a lot of reading over the weekend about it, that how we've all got to be wary, like literally all of us, because from my understanding, it's very much within the culture of Chinese people. It's you're almost brought up to, any information is useful to the government. It's seen as your civic duty to pass on information, whatever that be about, and it's totally alien from the way that we know it. And really, moving that forward, whether we're quite ready for what's coming down the traps. You read about things like quantum computers that are potentially, according to the security services, the end of this year we'll be able to unencrypt encrypted messages, and the last thing we need is sort of our nuclear capabilities being rendered useless by the end of the year.
So many things about that case still leave open questions on both sides, whether the Crown Prosecution Service is concerned. I mean, how can you define China, back before 2023, let alone now, as anything but a threat? Of course they were a threat, and everybody knew that. And then you've also got the question of the government's involvement. The Prime Minister insists that the government had no role in determining, the final decision. It wasn't involved in the evidence. I mean, maybe I'm missing something. Wouldn't be the first time. But what is the Attorney General for? Doesn't the Attorney General, Ben Wallace made this point a few days ago, doesn't the Attorney General look at cases like this, especially where national security is concerned, that he is a part of the government?
You would hope so, and I almost think they've Is it something as ridiculous, and this is, maybe just a theory I'm coming up with now, that they're so distracted by things domestically here, whether it be scandals or otherwise, over the last 12 months, they've totally took their eye off the ball of this case being an actual thing. And when it's finally come to fruition, Jonathan Powell's called in the 20 people that were involved in the meeting the day of the reshuffle and gone, right, well, what do we do about this then in a couple of weeks? Yeah. And you've sort of made it up on the hoof, potentially.
Okay. Joe, what's your thought for the day?
Well, we've been on a bit of a journey today, John. I'm not sure if you've been in it with me, but we've been on a bit of a journey. The morning started, I was listening to your esteemed colleagues this morning, Callum MacDonald and Kate McCann, on breakfast, where the government were announcing that they wanted to improve the sort of vocational offering for young people, and they were talking about how they were going to up the number of sort of hours that have to be done, as it were, as part of your training. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is all part of this effort to get young people into courses that are believed to be, more useful. There was a slight mishap with the MP that was on, the Minister, Josh McAllister, who was saying that it needs to be 100 hours minimum, but couldn't tell Kate McCann specifically what number it was moving from, what the average number of hours were. So was it 99 to 100 or was it 60 to 100? So you couldn't quite tell how big this new yardstick was going to be. But what's interesting is that tonight it's now broken that the government are planning to increase undergraduate tuition fees. The cap is going to be increased for all higher education providers in line with forecast inflation for the next 2 academic years. Yeah. So basically, at a time when they're already talking about less people going to university, for those that do go, it's going to get more expensive. So there's a sort of, is this a bit of carrot and stick going on, that you're going to make it more challenging to go to uni, so less people end up with degrees that are considered to be less valuable. But also, you're talking about that announcement happening at this is prime time for people making their applications, and they're literally just being hit with that info that it's going to become more expensive. Which is, if you're a family that are planning for someone going to uni, this will be a bit of a shock. So, interesting position that the government have decided to take on this.
Interesting thought. We do have to bear in mind, don't we, that a large number of our universities are underwater in their finances, and something at the moment they see no way through that.
But if you've got less people going to university because you're telling people they shouldn't be going, but then you're going to charge the fewer more money, does that balance your books? I'm not sure it does.
And my worry is, what does it do electorally? I don't think it's going to get quite the anger of the treble of tuition fees that we had under the coalition, but ultimately lots of young people already moving to the Greens away from Labour. You're now putting up their tuition fees again. They'll see it as it'll be sold as, and therefore they go, well, I hate the government again now. Why are they making it hard for me?
And what I don't get is that that's an announcement from the Education Secretary, who's currently trying to be the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party.
Oh, well, that pleases me greatly. That's going to help Lucy Powell.
That is a really interesting time to make that announcement when you're in the middle of an election campaign.
Lucy Powell must have given it her herself.
Okay, good thoughts, guys. I want to move on because some news breaking while I've been on air here with Drive. We're going to talk about that in just a second. The news that the Metropolitan Police have now said that they will no longer investigate non-crime hate incidents. Now, it is also said that Father Ted writer Graham Linehan has been told he will not face any further action over social media posts about trans issues. We can get the thoughts in a moment. We can all talk to Stephen Roberts, former Deputy Assistant Commissioner at the Metropolitan Police. This is Pienaar Friends here on Times Radio.
Times Radio on your smart speaker. Just say, play Times Radio. John Pienaar on Times Radio.
And here with me on Pienaar and Friends, Matthew Torbitt, the former Labour advisor, and Joe Tanner, political strategist. So let's talk then about this news this afternoon. Big story. It's leading the Times online now. You can see it there. I recommend you give it a good read. The Met says they will no longer investigate non-crime hate incidents. That's after the Met announced that the writer, the father-said writer Graham Linehan, will face no further action over his social media posts about trans issues. So let's now welcome to our number Stephen Roberts, the former Deputy Assistant Commissioner at the Metropolitan Police. Stephen, welcome to you.
Good evening, John.
Good to have you here, Stephen. Tell me, what do you make of this announcement?
It's a very welcome outbreak of common sense, I'm afraid. They were brought in with the best of intentions way back after the Macpherson inquiry into the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence. As a means or an attempted a means of trying to gauge the tension within communities that might lead to actual crime, actual violence, or indeed civil disorder. But I'm afraid as time has gone by, more and more layers have been added to the process. And it's ended up as a bureaucratic nightmare, yes, and one which is, to put it mildly, unwelcome. With many commentators and unwelcome with many of the people who get involved in it, particularly those on social media.
Yes. I mean, I guess I can understand the intentions behind this, Stephen, but I've never quite been able to understand why the police had to be involved at all. I mean, I recognise that comments can cause hurt and pain to the target of a particular comment that they may see as insensitive or insulting. And I can see why it might be a good idea to keep a track of the level of that kind of conduct. I just do not understand and never have why the police should be given the job of doing that.
Well, they were given the job of doing it essentially by the Macpherson inquiry, and the Home Office's wishes that it should be done that way. Yeah. Whether it was ever wise or not is a political issue, not a policing one.
Yes.
But
it also presupposes a workload on the police that could never really cope with a large number of such complaints. I mean, the police are overstretched beyond belief now.
And frankly, always have been. There's always been a greater demand for policing services than there has been a supply. But one of the basic jobs of policing is to maintain public order, to maintain the King's peace. And this was genuinely and quite properly intended to help with that,
yes,
to enable the service to have a level of intelligence about what sort of tensions there were in communities.
Yeah, I mean, that's a comprehensible argument, but, for the police to do it, I guess you could also add if the police aren't going to do it, then who would? But that doesn't seem to be a complete answer to the questions. Joe, you're nodding.
Well, yeah, and it just strikes me that you talk about the Macpherson inquiry, and what's interesting is that only recently we saw the footage of police officers in the Met, which were showing that they were clearly extremely racist and made, really unpalatable remarks. And yet that was one of the main features of that report, talking about the institutional racism within the police. And yet you think it almost feels like the priority was wrong, that they've focused on completely the wrong thing off the back of that, rather than actually dealing with one of the real rot at the heart of the Met that needed to be dealt with properly, yes, which was part of the failings around the Stephen Lawrence case in the first place.
Do you agree with that, Stephen?
No, I don't. I think Lord Macpherson focused very strongly on institutional racism, and there's been a huge amount of work, and we have to be honest, it's unfinished business, to put it mildly, around institutional racism and around direct racism in the service, which still needs to be stamped out. But Lord Macpherson certainly didn't ignore that. This was just an add-on recommendation, if you like, but one which had legs, had some merit at the time, but which has now long outlived its usefulness.
I think my point is not that he didn't focus on it, but it's more that I don't think others focused on what he was saying, because that Panorama documentary shows that not enough has been done, and clearly far more is still needed to be done.
Stephen?
Oh, absolutely, far more needs to be done. There is no question about that. Nor from I think any inside and an awful lot of people outside the Met, there's been huge efforts put into stamping out racism. It's just that it's a feature of the police service that we recruit from the general public. And however good the vetting processes are, however good the leadership is, there will always be some who sneak through. And the question is, what do you do about it? How do you get them out as quickly as possible?
I mean, Stephen, it got to the point where any complaint of almost any kind was judged to be actionable by the police in the area, with responsibility for law enforcement there, and some pretty dubious judgments were made. And the Graham Linehan was the one that got the headlines. There have been others, but if this course of action for police, a complaint leading to a visit, leading to everything else, if that's to be done away with, Stephen, what's to take its place, if anything?
I think we'll move away from what was an attempt at quantitative intelligence, which I have to say always gave a sort of falsely precise set of results, to much more qualitative intelligence and an understanding that it's actually talking to minority communities, talking to the public at a very local beat level, home beat level, that's going to yield the best intelligence. It's just harder to manage.
I think with this sort of stuff, it probably was done with the right intentions, and I assume with some level of paper trail. If something hasn't quite fit a crime at that point, but later leads to a crime, you can go, well, actually, we've got a log that you've done X, Y, and Z before this, so obviously, it plays into whatever you've been doing. I think the problem is to try and police offence. It is very hard. We all have different thresholds and tolerances and whatever else, and I think all you have to do is look back 10, 15 years. We all sort of laughed along with things like Little Britain, and then now everyone goes, well, actually, I was probably a little bit inappropriate, actually. So therefore, does legislation need to reflect the time that we live in? I think with regards to the Macpherson report, I think part of that maybe is taking on recommendations. I think since the Macpherson report, we've had different race reviews, 275 recommendations. I think we've barely implemented 10 to 15 of them. So there's something to be said for that as well. And it worries me a little bit that people like Graham Linehan and videos we see online are people essentially investigating things that haven't quite met a criminal threshold. And I wasn't going to talk about this, having only just heard the news, but I had a stalker in 2022, and I spoke to the police about this, and they said, you'll have to put in a complaint for us to do anything. And I said, well, I'm worried about how they'll react off the back of it, with it being a little bit, unpredictable. I said, can you not just go and have a word with them? And they said, well, we don't do that anymore. And yet we have the police at the moment going visiting people who haven't actually yet committed a crime, but going essentially having a word with them, it seems. So there doesn't seem to be an element of consistency, I would say. And I wouldn't expect Stephen to speak to my case or individual cases, but whether he had any thoughts on that, it's total seems a waste of time.
That used to be really what the Bobby and the Beat was there for. They would sort of be the pillar of community that would have a conversation. That's partly what they would do, wouldn't it? They would sort of almost just show that the law was present and watching, carefully, which is very different than, 5 officers turning up and arresting Graham as he got off a plane, which is, a completely different approach. I'm sure the police surely have got to welcome the clarity, because it does feel like that it just hasn't been working, so it's good that there is clarity.
Well, you'd see them clips and they're sort of going, I don't really want to be here, but I've sort of got to be here, and therefore, the police can't be happy with it whatsoever. No, and like you say, they probably will welcome the clarity.
Yeah. I mean, Stephen, is it right to say that just about any complaint is going to get an officer round to talk to someone the subject of the complaint? I mean, there is an element of filtering and judgment exercised here, isn't there, in a police station?
Yeah, there is, but officers, and I speak to young officers still, even though I'm retired, officers are concerned that if they receive some sort of complaint, that if they don't do something about it, they will be later subject to a complaint that they were negligent in their duty, that they were racist, that they were prejudiced in some other way. So they have very little discretion under these guidelines.
Well, what about
and I'm afraid
the general,
idea of a return to a mythical golden age of Dixon of Dock Green
No.
Oh, go on. It would
No.
be so good if we could.
Yeah, and we like a bit of nostalgia on this show. I will admit. I'm not making the case for pursuing non-crime hate incidents in the way that has been done. But when it comes to judgment on the part of the police, there are other examples elsewhere in the law of an inspector, say, in a police station giving an executive judgment on whether action should be taken. And that's formalised in the case of some police stops and searches and all that sort of thing. Why not that, Stephen?
Well, you can formalise it, and this is why we've ended up with the procedures that we have for non-crime hate incidents. Formalising it actually means making a written record. To make a written record, you need the details of who you've been dealing with, what you were dealing with them for.
Yeah.
So it's a vicious circle.
Yeah.
Yes, there are plenty of areas where police officers, by statute and by the Constitution, have discretion as to whether or not to enforce the criminal law in a particular case. But even there, they will make a record of why they haven't for their own protection.
Yeah, I mean, this was an announcement, as I say, since we've been on air, from the Metropolitan Police, so that speaks for the London area, the Met Police area. I mean, can we assume that all of the police forces of the country will very quickly fall into line and do exactly the same thing? Stephen, do you think?
I would be very surprised if Sir Mark hadn't made this announcement, having had previous discussions with the Home Office, and that the remainder of the service would quietly follow.
Stephen, can I ask a question as a man of experience? Whether you think this plays into a shift in society and the role of the individual, because I think that we see it in lots of sectors where, I don't know, if somebody goes to the doctor and they're told, well, actually, you'll feel a bit better if you do some exercise and eat a bit better, they're a bit annoyed because they want to leave feeling like they've got a box of pills or there's something to show for it. And I don't know if a part of this is, if it isn't investigated, well, no, but what about me? I'm important, this is my issue, and therefore you should be investigating on my behalf, and I feel threatened and whatever else, and therefore whether it's almost like not a compensation culture, but people feeling like the police owe them something, and therefore you've got to go and investigate, otherwise, you're going to potentially get complaints. And otherwise, is it a reflection of the society we're living in at the moment?
I think it is, and I think that's part of the reason why officers have so little discretion at the moment around non-crime hate incidents. If they don't record it as an incident and explain to the complainant what they've done and why they've done it, then it appears that they've done nothing. Whereas if it's all properly recorded, that is in itself a resolution for many people who complain, and the officers can then walk away from the situation and hopefully never hear about it again.
What would you have said to your superior if he said, right, you and your 4 colleagues have got to go and arrest Graham Linehan now upon his arrival at Heathrow? What would your thoughts have been?
You put him on the spot.
I will follow the Commissioner in that I am not going to criticise the people who had to make the decision on the ground at the time. It's not an incident I would like ever to see again. It's not an incident I would have ever imagined. But I will not criticise the people on the ground.
God, you'd make a good MP.
But it's an interesting point. The reality is that the social contract, if you want to call it that, or our expectations of our public services, the accountability that they're held to, means that for every overzealous officer or group of officers you could find, there are plenty of people probably listening that say that they reported something that then something didn't happen, and something worse may have happened as a result of inaction. So it's easy to sit in a room like this and to say, well, we can totally see the logic, but I think to get inside the head of an individual officer at a time that they took an action, I think it is a challenge that they're facing all the time, and they could have had experience or seen a colleague that missed something.
It's a thankless task, isn't it?
Exactly.
What will the government's position be on this now? Because the government has not been against action on non-crime hate incidents. They have a call for a better balance between those incidents that cause offence and those that cause threat and deserve some sort of action. I wonder how the government's going to respond to this.
Well, they've been trying to be on the fence a bit, haven't they? It's a bit like some of these issues around judges, and they're called activist judges by some politicians, but there's a sense that there's an over-interpretation of the law and the way to to behave. And so politicians always get into this thing of not wanting to criticise the police or to criticise the legal system, and so they get caught a little bit on the fence. And I think maybe they'll be glad the decision's been taken out of their hands.
Yeah. Stephen Roberts, thanks so much for joining us. It's really good to have you to get your expert thoughts on this. Now, let's just look ahead to after 7 o'clock when Kate Bosse takes over, and she's here. Hello, Kate.
Hi, John. We'll continue the discussion on the Met Police saying that they'll no longer investigate non-crime hate incidents, so that'll continue. We're also speaking to Rachel Maskell, the MP for York Central. Pertinent when we talk about Prince Andrew, of course, who will no longer use his Duke of York title. Constituents heavily favour that, said it's absolutely the right decision. She says actually MPs should go one further and change the legislation to give the King powers to be able to completely drop titles from, well, in this case, family members. So I've had a good old chat to her about that. We'll be picking up on Israel and Gaza and that very fragile ceasefire going on at the moment. And a quick one to mention with Francis Elliott, editor of The House magazine, former political editor of The Times. He's with us from 7:30 with Jackie Weaver, who's Chief Officer of the Cheshire Association of Local Councils, and she will be taking us through the Reform Councillor fallout. Those 4 suspended Kent councillors. She'll be casting her eye over the now infamous Zoom meeting between those councillors, what she makes of it and whether it's the right course of action. Should these meetings continue to be held online? Should they be held in person? Would that help at all? So she joins us. There's loads more in the show as well. We're going to actually hear from John Healey, the Defence Secretary. He's about to speak at an event where he'll talk about drones interfering in UK airspace over particular areas and giving the UK the right to just immediately shoot them down. So we'll take some of those comments that will come through at some point tonight as well.
That phrase that passed into legend from Jackie Weaver's parish council. You have no authority.
You have no authority.
I've got to say, I mean, what a call to take the story from what happened with Reform and have the sort of the tenacity and the thought to go and book her. I mean, that is just genius. I'm so impressed.
Well, that is my brilliant team, so I'm going to give them
they are outstanding. It's fantastic.
Looking forward to your show right after 7 o'clock.
See you later.
Kate Bosse. More coming up on Pienaar Friends. We're going to cross stateside because there's always stuff to catch up with stateside as we see day after day after day here on Pienaar and Friends at 6:31. Time for the news.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thank you, John. This is Andy Hayes with the headlines. The Metropolitan Police says it will stop investigating non-crime hate incidents. Scotland Yard said the Commissioner does not believe officers should be policing toxic culture war debates. The Met's also dropped its investigation against gender-critical campaigner Graham Linehan. The co-creator of Father Ted was arrested at Heathrow by armed officers in September over some posts on X. Former Deputy Assistant Commissioner at the Met, Stephen Roberts, has told Times Radio the decision on non-crime hate incidents is correct.
It's a very welcome outbreak of common sense. They were brought in with the best of intentions way back after the Macpherson inquiry into the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence as a means of trying to gauge the tension within communities. But I'm afraid as time has gone by, more and more layers have been added to the process and it's ended up as a bureaucratic nightmare.
Yeah. The Culture Secretary has told MPs that resources should not determine whether Maccabi Tel Aviv fans are able to travel to Villa Park in Birmingham next month. But Lisa Nandy says the responsibility lies with local agencies and it's not for government to assess the risks. And the first person to be convicted under the Online Safety Act of encouraging a child to self-harm has been sentenced to 20 years in jail. Carl Davis, a married father of 2 from the Wirral, targeted the teenager online before meeting and abusing her in person. And for a roundup of the news on demand, find the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
This is Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker, this is Times Radio.
And here with me on Pienaar and Friends, Joe Tanner, the political strategist, and Matt Torbitt, former Labour advisor. I mean, Joe and Matt, what are your thoughts on the story? It broke while we were on air earlier on. The Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, actually underlining the government's position that the government thinks that the football fans of Maccabi Tel Aviv should be allowed to attend the match, the Europa League match coming up against Aston Villa next month. So Lisa Nandy's set out her view in the House of Commons in answer to an urgent question earlier.
It is a long-established principle set out in law that the Police and Safety Advisory Group are operationally independent of government, and it is for them to take decisions on safety. However, this decision has far wider implications. In any situation, there is a risk that must be assessed, but in this case, the risk this event presents is in no small part down to the risk inherent in where the away fans come from and who they are. It is in that context that the solution that is proposed to exclude a group from attending is wrong. It chooses exclusion rather than looking at the full options available to manage that risk and include.
So Lisa Nandy speaking a bit earlier on, her Tory opposite number echoed the sentiment. What are you thinking about all of this? It was up to and still is up to the police to give advice to the local safety committee, taking in the local authority and so on. But the government very clear, those fans should be allowed to come and see that game. Is it wise?
I think I've changed my mind. I saw
over
it
what period?
Over since the decision was made until probably yesterday. I initially thought, well, really, listen, I've been going to football home and away for years. I've been to England international tournaments and seen lots of bad behaviour. And I always thought, well, this is up to UEFA, really. They're the governing body of the tournament being played. You know, if this is down to potential racist chants in the past and bad behaviour, then therefore it's normally them that take the decision. I thought, does it set a precedent for the police getting involved? It was then brought to my attention the police have got involved in a few cases in Europe this year, in which I think when a Italian team were playing Frankfurt, they've literally suspended Schengen to ensure that it can't go ahead, which seems crazy in a way. I think it can come across a little bit two-tier. Lots of people will say there are protests every weekend in support of Palestine or against Israel, however you want to see it. And normally if there's 100,000 people, you'll get police drafted in from all over the country, as is right, ensure everybody's safety and everybody can protest peacefully and whatever else. I think we're at a precipice, really. It's still very much boiling point when it comes to Israel-Palestine. And I think it would be unpredictable allowing certain fans from Maccabi Tel Aviv to potentially be running riot through Smallheath, Aston, Lascelles and wherever else is quite a high Muslim area of Birmingham. And vice versa, if the police were worried that they couldn't control the Muslim population or some of the Muslim population and others of Birmingham, then what do? Well, you have to ask, well, why are reinforcements not coming then? Why should normal fans who just want to go and watch the game and maybe follow them home and away, as many of us do with our teams, be able to go and watch the match? And you can only assume that whether they've got intelligence or otherwise, as the police do with lots of sporting events, they've gone, this is too big of a job. But then what? Are we going to let global events shape sport, which for many people, you can argue sport is political and maybe it is, for lots of people it's the only escape they have from normal world and politics and whatever else. So I worry about the precedent it sets, how Israeli football clubs will act in return to maybe British clubs going playing abroad and whatever. But I think because of behaviour made the same as other clubs, Millwall and others that have reputations, and maybe England away in many ways, some of the people I've seen at England away, it was probably the right decision to ensure public safety on all sides.
And it's worth pointing out, isn't it, for the sake of context and for the discussion, we're talking about Maccabi Tel Aviv, this football club, a section of whose fans are known for violence and racism, and take that violence and racism when the fans travel to other grounds and to other parts of the world. A derby game was just called off. In the past recent days because of exactly that.
But then
the game had to be stopped.
But that's the crux of it, John. It's known. There's a section of the fans, they are known. There is plenty that can be done to stop them. there must be more that can be done to stop that element of the fan base from being allowed to travel, from being allowed to attend matches. There must be more. In the current world that we live in, with all the tech that's available, we are tracked to within an inch of our lives all the time. The idea that these people who are going to be known to the authorities, that they can't be stopped in some way, just seems to me to be bizarre.
But against that, to pick out individual troublemakers, and there will be known troublemakers. I mean, the worst troublemakers will probably be banned already and are comparatively easy to stop getting into a football game. But we're talking about a larger section than those who I think who exist on a database that can be identified and stopped from entering the ground in that way. I mean, and these are fans, as I say, with a reputation. And the police decision was not a political decision. It was purely on grounds of public order, where there was an identifiable threat to public order. And recognising, here we're talking about the fans of an Israeli Tel Aviv football club against the background of anti-Semitism that's definitely going on, the sensitivities of the Gaza conflict. You have to make a very, very careful judgment. But if there's a risk, if there is violence, and these fans are known for it, then, well, someone is going to have to answer for that afterwards, aren't they? If the threat was known.
And that is the challenge, right? If you know that there is potentially going to be violence, then there's a decision for the other fans as to whether they attend, full stop. Now, I know the point about people being in local communities and the risk that poses. But, you know, I was at England-Hungary, and I took my son and a bunch of his friends, and I was having to message from inside of Wembley Stadium, where it was all kicking off on the other side of the pitch, and I could see the alerts from other media to Times Radio, because I don't think Times Radio was around at the time. But they were saying that, you know, there was trouble at the game, there was trouble in the run-up to the game, there was trouble at the game. And I was messaging as like the mum with this bunch of teenagers going, we're okay, it's on the other side of the pitch. But you could see it. You could see flares going off, you could see fighting. I've been at Millwall. Millwall's a very different club now. I will stand up for that part of South East London. It's very different. They managed to get rid of a lot of the problems that they had.
Sure.
But
look, for a Millwall fan, you're a thoroughly decent person.
I'm not a Millwall fan, but I have been to the Den before. I've been to many. But I was at Chelsea against Borussia Dortmund, and, you know, I mean, I was terrified because there were flares and all sorts going on. They were a very lively group, but there was no actual trouble. Now, this may be on a different scale, but I do think we have to really question what we're doing if we think that we're going to have sport and, you know, major tournaments, and perhaps more pressure needs to be placed on the clubs, because actually, if you've got that difficult a fan base, should you even be in these competitions, which are international competitions? Should there be more sanctions on teams where they've got problematic fans? I don't know, but maybe that's something we need to consider.
I think part of it comes down to the club. You've got to ban these people. If this is how they're acting at home games, it's going to be the same at away. Normally, if you have a banning order at an English football club, every time England play away, you have to go and hand your passport in at your local police station. Therefore, you're not joining in with everything else. When I've been to games where there's been historically been a rivalry and the police have intelligence it could kick off, you're normally escorted from the train station to the ground, back out, got to stay in the ground for an hour longer and whatever else. If that's not happening in Israel, then maybe you have to question whether these teams should be allowed to play. And I don't want to get... What I don't like is people overreaching, politicians, and going, we should ban all Israeli football clubs from Europe, and because that's their hobby horse and whatever else. But if there is a particular problem with a particular club, how you tend to solve this stuff is if you do ban fans and they can't go to games, then it tends to stop. But ultimately, you have to go after these individuals, definitely.
Our listener Dan has written in. Thanks for writing, Dan. Always interested in your views. Do keep them coming. Dan says, you keep saying that some Maccabi fans have a reputation for violence and racism. You said it multiple times, but so do every football team. Continually referring to them as violent and racist seems like an attempt to reframe this away from what it is, an anti-Israeli protest. That is Dan's view, and thank you for sharing that with us, Dan. I've got to say, it seems a bit of a stretch to suggest that the West Midlands police are acting out of prejudice against Jews, out of anti-Semitism, or making an anti-Israeli political process.
I would have expected if they'd said after the attack in Manchester, they'd have said we have concerns because of what happened, because we've seen a terror attack so recently. I would have understood that to have been something that may have played into a decision versus the talk about the fans. But, you know, if we're talking about fans and not being allowed to travel, you know, England fans would have gone nowhere for years.
Well, no, but England fans, after the 2020 European finals, and there was trouble at the gates, remember? I was there. Well, I was there. There was racism in the grounds, but wasn't the reason for the ban. The reason for the ban were people trying to storm the gates and get in. And UEFA said, look, that's it. Behind closed doors, no crowds for 2 games. That was the ruling. It was an order, and it was a response and a punishment for the violence that had taken place.
Now, it hasn't stamped out the racism. No,
but
I would say that I have been to many England games, and I do not feel unsafe when I go to them.
No, nor do I. And even when you see, a potential for rival fans kicking off. I mean, it's not often you get a very clear-cut case of that. It's not unknown, but it is not often you see that. And by segregation, by escorting fans down the street to the ground and back, holding fans back, you can deal with that, and the police do deal with that in exactly that way. I think we're talking here though about a different order of potential threat. Anyway, look, that's the conversation, and you both of you, glad of your views. Tell me what you think. Send me a text. We've got more to talk about though on the show. Before we're done, we're going to be crossing over to the States and talking to George Grills, our Washington correspondent for the Times, here on Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio at 6:45.
Is politics, business and sport every weekday in breakfast from 6:30 a.m. John Pienaar
on Times Radio.
And here with me on Pienaar and Friends, Matthew Torbitt, the former Labour advisor, and Joe Tanner, the political strategist. And we have now been joined from stateside George Grills, the Times Washington correspondent. Hello to you, George.
Good afternoon.
George, good to have you here. There's a lot. We've got too many things I'd like to chat to you about to get in the time we've got left on the programme. I'm just going to pile in with the question of Ukraine. I mean, President Trump addressed the issue of Ukraine and hopes of peace there when he met earlier on with the Australian leader Anthony Albanese. Let's have a listen to this.
I've settled 8 wars in 8 months. Not bad. I have one more to go. It's Russia-Ukraine, and I think we'll get there, but it's turned out to be nasty because you have 2 leaders that truly hate each other. They hate each other beyond all else, and it makes it actually a little bit difficult.
A little bit difficult. Understatement of not just this year, but I don't know how long. Now, the president was also asked by a reporter if he still thought Ukraine could win back the land taken by Russia, as he said last month.
Well, they could. They could still win it. I don't think they will, but they could still win it. I never said they would win it. I said they could win. Anything can happen. War is a very strange thing.
War is a very strange thing. Anything can happen. I mean, George, how's that going down with you and where you are? I mean, in particular, look at the background to this. We had, a short while ago, President Trump sounding as if he was finally losing patience with Vladimir Putin, getting tough with Putin. The idea was that he might actually supply Ukraine with those powerful Tomahawk cruise missiles. Then a phone call with Putin later and a meeting with Ukraine's leader Volodymyr Zelensky very quickly after that, and the Tomahawks are no longer on offer to Ukraine, and it looks as if he's now parroting lines that you could hear any given day from Vladimir Putin. What on earth are we to make of this?
I think it's another deft act of diplomacy from Vladimir Putin. Knowing that Zelensky was going to have his 3rd meeting with Trump in the White House this year, he got in ahead of him, and the Kremlin instigated the call with Trump, and he managed to get him for 2.5 hours. Now, anyone who's been in the room with Trump for 2.5 hours knows that at the end of it, he quite often comes out repeating what you've said for a while after. He tends to kind of favour those he's listened to nearer in time.
Yes.
And so having had that, before that call with Putin, the talk was all about whether or not the Americans would give Tomahawk long-range cruise missiles to Ukraine. And after that call with Putin, it turned into a question of how much land Ukraine should be forced to give up.
Yeah, I mean, George, you can argue that is about Vladimir Putin's diplomatic skill, or you could say this is about Donald Trump, who's a bit like a cushion, just bears the impression of the last person who sat on him. And if that is the case, then what hope is there of getting a clear position out of the President of the United States on this issue?
I think if you're Ukrainian, if you take a longer view of it, you have to draw some positives from the fact that, for example, cast your mind back to February this year, there could have been a public meltdown very easily in the Oval Office. Actually, Trump was pretty polite about Zelensky in front of the cameras and praised his suit and all the rest of it. And the disagreements actually happened behind closed doors, so the Europeans can count that as a victory. After the February summit, the US withdrew weapons from Ukraine, and that was existential for the Ukrainians. That has not happened this time, and actually the Ukrainians dragged him back into a position where they said, let's freeze the conflicts along the current front lines. That's where the ceasefire should be. So there are positives to draw from the Ukrainians, but certainly Trump appears to have lost patience again with Ukraine rather than with Russia, perhaps because he sees it as easier to kind of bully Ukraine into a settlement rather than bully Putin.
He does seem to be, he's wobbling about all over the place, depending on the last conversation, Joe.
Yeah, and it was interesting that George mentioned that point about the ending 8 wars in 8 months, and it sort of makes you wonder whether, is it about him losing patience in the sense of the positions that both sides are taking, or is it just more that he wants to hurry up and solve the 9th one in the 9th month because it's gone on too long and he wants to kind of nail it?
Grown up, is it?
Well, but I don't think we expected anything different. I mean, that's the challenge, and so there is something really interesting about this dynamic where it does feel, I think you're absolutely right, it does feel that the last person that sort of has a long and sort of impressionable conversation on Trump affects the way that he behaves. But I do think it's worrying where this is going, because it certainly did feel that we were going in the direction of a bit more support for Ukraine and where things were heading. But we also had this strange thing over the weekend about the tunnel, didn't we, between Russia and Alaska, and the talk of this tunnel that I think was several times longer than the Channel Tunnel, which would have been like one of the most ambitious projects. And Trump kind of just... It was interesting, the way his language around it was very much, well, I've only just heard about it. But, it's an interesting idea, kind of, was the vibe he was giving. Well, you wonder where that came up in the conversation between the two of these leaders, whether that came up as part of the, is Trump getting dangled a carrot by Putin somewhere? Who knows?
Well, he does this, though. It frustrates me that he always seems to act as a sort of observer, forgetting that he's actually president. He goes, oh, this is happening. I had no idea. And I used to think it with Israel-Palestine. I thought if there's one person that could pick up the phone and remind Netanyahu that actually he needs America, it's Donald Trump. And instead he'd go, yeah, it's really bad, isn't it? And I don't know if he's a bit bored. He solved 8 wars, so he's now starting one with Venezuela. I suppose if he can stop a war he started, does that count as 10 after Russia, Ukraine, or whatever else? Like, utterly ridiculous. George, are you aware from any murmurs both in America and over here whether there will be another concerted effort of EU leaders to go over after any potential summit to try and focus Donald Trump's mind once more on actually maybe we need to support Ukraine and don't just let Putin buy a bit more time as he appeared to do in Alaska?
Well, they're going to struggle to pin him down in the next few days because he's actually going off to Asia at the end of this week, and he's got his summit with Xi Jinping. So it's he's focusing on that hemisphere, as it were. But then at some point he's got to crowbar in his meeting with Putin in Budapest. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if I was a European diplomat, I'd try to kind of add on a leg in Paris or Berlin or London or somewhere to that European visit as a way of kind of trying to keep Trump on the straight and narrow. That's what I would probably be trying to do.
Yeah. And I believe he's got competition, actually, to try and get in with him, because he's also, I believe, floated the idea that he might go and meet your man in North Korea as well, just to sort of see if we can maybe normalise things there. Yeah. I think even that's a stretch for him to be fitting in Xi, Putin and Kim Jong-un. It's almost like the world's worst dinner party, actually, isn't it? I won't fancy Fancy having them round for tea, would you?
You let no one get a word in edgeway. But does George raise an interesting point though about the fact that this Far Eastern trip's going on, and is this part of a game in advance of that? Because if he was going to the Far East and having a conversation in China where he'd taken a very strong line against Putin, would that have been a difficult backdrop?
It's true.
So is this actually... I always want to believe there's a double bluff with Trump. I don't know why. I just want to believe there's some good there and that there is a double bluff coming and he's playing some weird game. I mean, I'm sure he's not that good, but I just would like to believe there's a bigger play here that he's actually up to. But your point about the world leaders, George, I mean, surely they all would have badgered him when they were all in the Middle East anyway. Because and it's interesting that he's changed his position so quickly, because surely that would have been on the minds of everybody when they all gathered.
Waiting for 6 hours for him, twiddling their thumbs in the same.
I was about to say, I don't think they had the time really to do it, because they were all kept waiting in Sharm el Sheikh while he was kind of in the Knesset, receiving all the accolades. So by the time he got there, it was a kind of in and out job.
And it didn't look like Keir Starmer sort of got blanked, didn't he? So it didn't look like he had much of a chance to speak, I suppose.
I've got to say, I do struggle with the idea of Donald Trump who moves in mysterious ways, rather like the good Lord. I do kind of struggle with that.
I'm not sure it's quite that level, but I just want to hope that there's something else in this. I just want to hope there's something else going on.
He did make comments though. He got asked, do you think Putin is playing you? And he says, I've been played by some of the best of them, but I always come out on top. So I don't know, is he aware he's being played? But he has got some up his sleeve.
He knows it. He's enough people telling him it's a risk.
I think we've got to hope so anyway. We've got to hope so.
Deep sigh.
We're trying to cheer everybody up.
We've only got a couple of minutes left. I'll just get your thoughts on Prince Andrew, as he still is, and Duke of York, as he kind of still is technically, although he's not going to use the title anymore. After all that we've seen, the pressure piling on Prince Andrew, inviting or asking one of his protection officers to investigate Virginia Giuffre, now late Virginia Giuffre, one of the victims of the Epstein scandal, while he was under the cosh over that scandal. Should more be done? Let me come to you for the first, George, with your perspective from the other side of the Atlantic. Prince Andrew, should more be done? Could more be done? Well, I suppose you can, because you can take away his dukedom. You can stop him being called Prince if the government steps in. What do you think?
I think if I were Prince Andrew, I would be worried and not think this is the end of it, because there is a drip of revelations coming out from the Epstein files from over here, because Democrats in Congress are kind of forcing through with the House Oversight Committee. They're kind of subpoenaing material from the DOJ, from the FBI, from Epstein's estate, and they've had some success. You saw that birthday book of wishes come out. But, the big prize is the entirety of the Epstein files. And there are signs that the Democrats are nearly there. They've got 217 signatures and they need 218. Right. And they have the 218th, but Republicans are stalling about swearing in this new Democrat Congress woman. Yeah. So if I were Andrew, I would be closely following American politics and thinking, blimey, there is a chance that this all comes out.
I'm guessing you'll be doing exactly that, George. And as and when this the full files come out, what are you sort of imagining? Maybe in there, and beware, my learned friends are listening. But what do you think?
Well, we have from a previous release an index of what we think might be included in it, and it's a pretty sordid list of objects. I don't want to go into the horrible details, but it contains toys and statues and maps of Epstein's Caribbean islands, but most crucially, it's about, I think, 300 gigabytes of data on 40 plus computers and electronic devices. So that's the material, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of people so keen to get their eyes on all of that stuff. And what's for Andrew? Would you go further than we've seen so far?
I think it's going to happen anyway. I think we've just had the extracts of the book have clearly been circulated, and that's been enough for Andrew to do a deal over relinquishing titles. My feeling is it's going to go further whether he wants it or not.
Would leave it to the king. I think he will end up exiled, almost socially and maybe physically. He's not going to be welcome here. If you wade in as the government, you set a dangerous precedent of stripping royal titles. A left-wing Republican government gets in, decide they don't want a king. It's dangerous. And do you want to be the MP that votes in support of Andrew? No, thanks.
Oh, guys, we have to leave it there. George Grills in Washington. Thanks so much, George and Matt and Joe. It's always lovely to have you here. Emily Leahy was our producer, our technical operator, Isaac Marley. I'm up same time tomorrow. Kate Boss is up next on Times Radio.
across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the times.
Thanks, John. Have a great night. It's 7 o'clock. This is Kate Borsay and the evening edition coming up.
They could still win it. I don't think they will, but they could still win it. I never said they would win it. I said they could win. Anything can happen. You know, war is a very strange thing.
Donald Trump there saying he doesn't think Ukraine will win its war with Russia after reports of a bust-up with Volodymyr Zelensky over ceding territory. We'll speak to the chair of the EU's Committee on Russia about what Europe and NATO does next. Plus, we'll speak to the MP for York Central, who no longer wants her city to be associated with Prince Andrew. And as always, we've got an exclusive look inside tomorrow's paper. All of that to come, but first, the latest news headlines with Andy Hayes.
Thank you, Kate. Good evening. The Metropolitan Police says it will stop investigating non-crime hate incidents. Scotland Yard said the Commissioner does not believe officers should be policing toxic culture war debates. The Met's also dropped its investigation against gender-critical campaigner Graham Linehan. The co-creator of Father Ted was arrested at Heathrow by armed officers in September over some posts on X. The Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy has told MPs that a decision on whether to ban Israeli football fans from travelling to Birmingham is a matter for the police. Local authorities have decided to stop Maccabi Tel Aviv fans from attending a Europa League match at Villa Park next month.
Ultimately, the law is clear that responsibility for this decision lies with local agencies. It is not for the government to assess the risks surrounding this football match, but we are clear that resources will not be the determining factor in whether Maccabi Tel Aviv fans can be admitted, and that this fundamental principle that nobody in our country will be excluded from participating in public life because of who they are must be upheld.
The Prime Minister has described the decision to ban fans as wrong. The first person to be convicted under the Online Safety Act of encouraging a child to self-harm has been sentenced to 20 years in prison. 42-year-old Carl Davis from the Wirral targeted the teenager online before meeting and abusing her in person. He was arrested and charged with 17 offences after his wife called a number and a child picked up. Detective Sergeant Rob Griffiths from Greater Manchester Police led the investigation.
He would pick her up from school, she'd be in a school uniform, they'd travel